Thank you for listening to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast, available on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, and Stitcher. Also, please follow Matt's Movie Reviews on Facebook, YouTube, Parler, and Instagram. And of course, be sure to visit www.mattsmoviereviews.net for the latest reviews, top 10 lists, and more. Now, on to the show.
There was an illusion being created using the most awesome tools and the greatest tricks that the American intelligence community had learned to use against our enemies. Now it was being deployed against the American people and our president.
This is the biggest political scandal in modern history, which makes Watergate look like a tiff.
The FBI director has no credibility.
The left used to not trust the FBI, and now they love them.
This can happen to General Michael T. Flynn. Imagine what they do to anybody who has a single strike against them.
35 Russian diplomats in the U.S.
Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I am your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode number 299. Out now on digital is The Plot Against the President, a documentary based on the best-selling book by journalist Lee Smith that chronicles the attempts by the Democrat Party and the intelligence community to usurp President Donald Trump from power. Diving headfirst into the belly of the deep state beast, The Plot Against the President is an equally compelling and damning investigation that lays out the who, what, how, and why of an attempted coup against the President of the United States. And joining me now to talk about The Plot Against the President is the film's director, Amanda Milius. Amanda, I thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to talk to a new audience. Absolutely.
And just to let people know who you are, of course, the daughter of the legendary John Milius, and he's a great filmmaker and screenwriter and of his own right. And it's really interesting just looking at your career trajectory so far. You kind of went into the family business in a sort of way. You started off with a short film, The Locus Gunner. That was back in 2016. Is that correct?
Yeah, it came out in 2015. And I was pretty much thinking I was just going to do film for my whole life. I went to USC School of Cinematic Arts for grad school, and the Lotus Gun was a short that I'd done. It was, to graduate, you have to do a thesis film. And so I did it for that. So it came out in 2015, and it actually got into just tons and tons of film festivals. So I was touring it for like a year. And that's kind of what I thought I was going to be doing. But then the election happened, and I had a bit of time off. I didn't have a consistent job at the time because I was touring the movie. So I would have 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off, and I would go and volunteer in Nevada, which was the closest swing state to California, for the campaign, just to get near some politics, because I thought it would be, I was really interested in it, and I couldn't talk about it in Los Angeles. Yeah. And it was such a crazy political climate. And so I ended up just thinking I would never do film again, and stuck with the campaign. And then I got hired in the administration. And I worked at the State Department. I worked as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Content in the Bureau of Public Affairs. And I did that for 3 years, thinking I was just never going to make a movie again. And then this kind of happened. It just, I realized it was the right thing to do. I thought kind of maybe the only person who could actually do it, because I had this filmmaking background.
So the FBI's investigation into President Trump and his supposed connections to Russia and the whole RussiaGate kind of thing, that stuff kind of happened like almost instantaneous. Like as soon as he came into power, there are things happening there. When you're working in the White House, do you see this kind of stuff unfolding in front of your eyes? And while it is happening, is there a little bit of you, like the filmmaker in you, that's saying, you know what, this could have the potential to be like a great film?
Well, it actually started before he came into office. I mean, even as we were arranging, I worked on the inaugural committee, which is the kind of organizing committee that does the inauguration. It's like this giant thing. And even then, it was the rumors and the sort of news stories were popping, and everyone just thought it was ridiculous. We were all looking at each other, the staff, the various people that were working on this. We're like, this is so silly. We were making fun of it. We were like, oh yeah, because Russia was really why we won. It was just absurd. but then it just became a really serious thing. And at the time, I had just so recently left the film industry, and I was so sick of Hollywood, and I was so sick of the media and just all of it that I wasn't thinking about it in terms of a movie that early. I was more just angry because we were dealing with government officials and people who the national security of the United States is actually in their hands. And these people are walking around believing the press, thinking that the president's a Russian asset, so they don't have to do anything that he says, or they don't have to follow the direction of our administration, which is really dangerous. So I was more concerned about it in that kind of way. I thought I could see that happening right in front of my eyes. People, oh, well, we're not going to do that because it's the Trump administration telling us to do it. And you're like, well, that's the chain of command, so get used to it. But no, it started to become more of like I would always think when I was probably a year into it, running around DC, that it was very much like a spy movie. Yeah. It was like a spy thriller. I mean, all the stuff that was going on, I had friends in various departments and agencies, and, people you'd have to have a meeting with certain people. You'd change cars twice because you knew that people were following you. I mean, it was completely ridiculous and insane. And at that point, yeah, I mean, the vibe of DC is so unique, and I don't really see it portrayed a lot in films. I mean, you've got House of Cards, which really did a good job of showing this sort of desolate, sterile, the white monuments against like a black sky type of look, which I really liked. And I thought was really accurate, because that's what it feels like when you're going in and out of these government buildings, and you're, it's very noir. And so I was there hasn't really been a lot of DC noir. And I thought that it really made sense for that type of genre. All the President's Men is one of my favorite movies. Yeah. And so we kind of tried to reference that style a lot with the focus on the buildings and the brutalist architecture, and treat it like you would treat a scripted movie as far as the mood, and not just, for documentaries, not just sort of let whatever happens happen, like really try to create a mood.
I think that's really interesting, because in something that I noticed while watching the film as well, the documentaries, they can be done in certain ways. Some people can add flourishes in regards to maybe animations or recreations. They can just do the standard like handheld kind of stuff as well. Your film really does have that kind of style to it, and you reference a number of movies there. I'm really interested as well, though, when it came to putting the film together, is it true that I read that you guys shot like 70 hours of footage?
Yeah, and we did that in a really short amount of time because, it was one of the reasons I decided to direct it. Initially, I was thinking I would just produce it and we would have someone else direct it. But we realized the only way to get this done on time, as far as to get it out while it's relevant, is for me to do it myself. And when we set out to do that, I had to resign from the government because obviously you can't do both. And so we didn't even have the company formed until April of this year. And so we weren't even really able to start until it's been less than 6 months. It's really been fast. I mean, we basically made this whole movie in like 4 months, which is unheard of. I mean, nobody makes a documentary that fast, especially with this many interviews. We had 35 interviews over the course of a month and a half. So some days we had 2 interviews, some days we had really long ones. But yeah, we have an insane amount of material. And actually, the first cut of the movie was 4.5 hours long. Right. And we're going to release it in like a chapter series. So we'll have, various chapters available on some of our subscription channels and as DVD and Blu-ray extras, sort of like an extended cut, but where people can dive into the section that they're most interested in. Like if people want to jump into the Flynn section more, or the media section, or whatever they're most interested in, because there's just so much good material. I mean, it's such a dense issue, and there's such interesting stuff that people don't know that we could literally make, a series about this forever.
And that's a good point, because in my review that I put up a couple of days ago, I actually wrote that a series, there's potential for a series here, considering the amount of information, the amount of interview heads. I myself was just like wanting more. And it's really good to hear there's going to be potential for something similar to that. And I think that's a really great idea that you're going to put together in regards to having people dive into the chapter really interested in and try to get into the thick of it. You know, in the last 4 years of Donald Trump's presidency, there's so many things going on. And I think what your film does really successfully, I mean, there's just this web of just corruption and all this kind of stuff. And you guys really just point this really clear kind of path, like these through lines. They really just point to A to B to C to D. When you're working with so much footage and so much going on, and it would have been really tricky. I mean, you have a editor with you. His name is Jared Leesland, and from what I understand, this is probably his first feature film as well. So you have all these elements at play. You have the timeline as well. You have to do it in such a number of months. How tricky was it to really stay on point, stay on the narrative when there's so many elements at play?
Well, I think actually the time crunch that we had, the fact that we only had a little bit of time to edit the movie actually helped us in that way. In some way, you could say it actually was really difficult, but because there is so much material, when we would constantly ask ourselves, well, how do we just keep it to the most important information that gets you, like you said, the through lines from point A to B to C. And, you know, part of it was sticking to, you know, Michael Flynn is a major through line through the whole movie because his story is involved in the background of why they did this to the president and why they were so threatened by him and by the administration in general. And also all of their crimes. You've got the unmasking, the surveillance, and then the judicial crimes. So it was a really good thing to be able to return to his story as we told the larger story, because he's kind of the microcosm of the whole thing. The reason I would say that the time crunch actually helped us is because there wasn't time to do what you usually do with movies or a documentary specifically, where you play it, you know, you've got your long cut, you play it for a bunch of people, you see what information is most interesting, and then you cut the other stuff and you go back and forth and do all these. We really didn't have time to do that. We just had to sit there and go, okay, how do we get from point A to point B? And everything else has to go. And we couldn't be precious about anything. And, you know, there's so many places where I'm like, you know, there's little segments we've built and all of these other sections where I'm very attached to, where I think it's really important information as well. But there was no time for being sentimental about what we cut. It was like, we knew we had to get it down to 90 minutes. And when it's 4 hours long, you just start, you know, cutting. So that was, I guess, somewhat helpful because it sort of laser focuses you on what absolutely has to be there, like what the essentials are.
When you have that time period and you have that kind of pressure to put this movie together, and considering the importance of the subject matter as well, as you're doing it, do you realize things within yourself as a filmmaker you never realized before? Are there skills coming to the fore that you never realized that you had within you?
I think in a way, it going off the making us less precious about holding on to material and just sticking to what was absolutely necessary is it almost makes you more of a filmmaker that is concerned with a larger audience's ability to process the movie and their response to it. Whereas if I was making a scripted film, when I've done that, and if I was making it on a timeline that was pretty much my own and wasn't as insane, there's things that I would do where I say to myself, well, I really like this section and it really speaks to me, and it might not speak to everybody, but there's a small, you know, maybe it's a small or a large, you never know until you put the movie out, but that there's an audience for this particular little thing that I'm doing, you know, with this scene. And I like this scene, and some people might think it's weird or it's boring or it's confusing, or it's strange, or artsy fartsy, or whatever it is. There's this thing in the back of your mind where you're like, well, I'm going to do it because I really like it, and it speaks to me, and it'll speak to everybody else. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. But on this, you kind of really had to decide, you know, there wasn't really time to go off in these sort of stranger directions and just be almost, kind of selfish with your filmmaking. Like we had to really just say like, no, like we have to this has to have the maximum effect. It has to be clear to everybody. And it sort of forces you to be a little bit more accessible than I normally am, I would say.
Another element to this whole story in your documentary as well is the role that the media played in a lot of this. And it's very frustrating because essentially I'm sort of part of the media as well. I mean, my forte is film criticism, is outside of current affairs and journalism, etc. But there are links there. So it's kind of embarrassing to me especially in the last few years, to just see how the media class and journalism as well has taken a big dump on its own industry with the way it's approached some of these stories. And it's almost kind of comedic, especially when and I was reminded while watching this movie about the stories like the whole Donald Trump in hotel with Russian hookers being peed on. And the one I didn't even know of, I think it must have been a bigger story in the States than it was here in Australia, was the one with David Nunes being on a yacht with hookers somewhere. I don't know what was going on there. And
yeah, it's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. What I wanted to know was that these people are supposed to be the guardians of the gate of democracy. They're supposed to be, in the public square and fishing out information, telling the truth. But the responsibility, whether unfortunate or not, has to fall on documentary makers like yourself to tell the truth. Do you feel at the same type of frustration on your end of you know what, I shouldn't be doing this. This shouldn't have been taken care of years ago, but here we are.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel that way. I mean, I think one of the reason the media plays such a prominent role in the movie also is because none of this would have been possible without the media being complicit. The media covered for this story, and no one would, the whole country and and outside of the country and everything, no one would be walking around thinking that the Trump administration had something to do with Russia if it weren't for the media. All of the FBI and all of the CIA and all of the NSA and all of the other, agencies and everyone else in the Democratic Party and the DNC and the Obama administration, everybody that was involved in this, they could have all done what they did and it wouldn't have succeeded without the media. They were actually the final requirement in the conspiracy for this to work. And so they're absolutely to blame. And I do think that it is up to me or filmmakers or independent journalists, which is why I feature a lot of them in the movie. A lot of the new journalists like Jack Posobiec, Mike Cernovich, Raheem Kassam, people that are actually, that were right and that were telling the truth the whole time. And most people wouldn't know the truth if it wasn't for voices like theirs. So I think it is important that we do that. And a lot of the, I'm always waiting for the negative press. Like so far, we've gotten nothing but positive press, which is great, and everyone loves it, which is really, really awesome. But I'm waiting for the hit piece because it's going to come. And so I'm sitting here going, okay, well, what is it going to be? Like, what are they going to say? But any mainstream media that does want to criticize it, I think they would look a little ridiculous because it's their fault that I had to make the movie in the first place.
Yeah.
I wasn't sitting around going, oh, I work in the administration, I work in the government. Like, how can I find a movie to make, because I want to get back into films. I didn't want to do it at first. I had to be convinced to do it. And I only did it because no one's told the story properly. I mean, I'm not the one that, prevented the mainstream media from telling the truth. And the fact that nobody else has done this, it's one of those things where you're like, how has no one else put this together? There's no, even on one of these more conservative leaning stations or channels or something, put together like a 2-night special explaining why RussiaGate was a total hoax and why it was ridiculous. They wouldn't even be able to do it because they're too in bed with other, they're too corrupt in a sense themselves. There's very few mainstream media journalists who are correct on this issue and who actually told the truth. And a lot of them are bound by, other obligations, but they've done, the work putting things out piecemeal, but nobody's really put it together in one package. And, that's so I guess I would say to any mainstream media that comes after us, it's your fault that this movie exists anyways. So if they don't like it, that's their problem.
What was your reaction to the recent news about the Attorney General ending the investigation over Obama officials unmasking Trump officials, particularly Michael Flynn, and having no arrests? I know President Trump was very upset about that. You yourself, having delved into this stuff and having talked to the older people and seen the evidence and all the other stuff, what was your reaction to that?
Well, actually on that, I mean, it's incredibly disappointing. It's ridiculous, but I'm not surprised because I think that the agencies and the DOJ is already, it's so corrupt and it's so destroyed by the Obama administration and what they did on their way out that I'm not surprised that it's still dysfunctional. I'm also not surprised that they didn't go after anybody for the unmaskings, because the problem, I mean, and I'm not an attorney by any stretch. I'm not even, I'm not there's a reason I interview other people, not myself, about this. But the thing that I would say is that it isn't that surprising, because the unmaskings, as distasteful and horrible and as they're so the antithesis of a democracy or the kind of republic that we have, doing them at that time may or may not have been illegal, because the people that did them had the clearance to do it. The fact is that they abused our legal system, and the Fisa, which is the kind of warrant you get, I don't know if your listeners know, a Fisa warrant is what they use to spy on Americans, which they're not supposed to do, but it's supposed to be very regulated and it's supposed to be very rare. Mm-hmm. The fact that they abused this system, it's harder. I could see it being a harder legal case. It's more about the fact that our laws need to be reformed. And that's one of the things that comes out in the Nunes memo, the Congressman Nunes memo, that this is one thing that I wish we had more time to go into, which is that one of the things that the memo argues for more than any other is reform to the FISA system and reform to all of these systems that allowed for this to happen, because without that reform, you're not going to get prosecutions with people that do this, because they could argue that it was within the law. And that's only, and when I say that, I'm going to asterisk that by saying that's only some of the things that happened. Mm-hmm. I don't know how they're going to get off for changing the general's 302, which is the document that they create after an interview, the FBI creates after an interview, and they doctored it, they altered it. It's really, I don't know how they're going to get away from that. That is a really, really ridiculous crime. And also the place where I think you might get a conviction potentially is, and Mike Cernovich actually points this out, who, by the way, is also an attorney, is in lying under oath to the FISA court. So the FISA warrants have to be approved in a court, even if the person who obviously they're trying to spy on is not there. The agents have to swear under oath that the information that they're presenting to get the warrant is true, and they lied. They lied under oath. So there's a crime. If the DOJ can't get people for the unmaskings, they ought to go after every single other crime that occurred in this situation.
Yes, and there's a treasure trove of them, as the documentary clearly shows. Amanda, yeah. For yourself, in regards to your career, what's next for you? Are you going to continue looking in filmmaking? Is documentary filmmaking something that you wanted to continue with? Because I know your short film was like a apocalyptic Western, and I know that your influence-wise, you are really into filmmakers like Terrence Malick and John Ford, etc. More kind of your visual kind of your visual filmmakers. Are you going to go back into that kind of territory, or is documentary filmmaking something you're going to stick with for a little while?
Well, I mean, I never thought I would make a documentary. When I was going to film school, when I was working in film, I worked in film and other visual, I worked in fashion photography, like all of this stuff. I never thought I was going to be doing documentary. It was the one thing I really thought I would never do. I think I might do another one. I mean, I always thought I wasn't going to direct again and that I would just produce. So I'm not entirely sure what's coming next. I do know that what has been interesting in this whole thing is I created my company, my production company, just to make this film. And weirdly, actually, maybe not weirdly, but we're getting a ton of both talent. So people all over the country who are saying, oh, I actually am, conservative, or I'm somewhat right wing, or whatever it is. And I can't say so in my industry. I have to hide my politics. I'd really like to work with you, on your next project. So we've got this really, fairly robust list of really talented people that we can work with around the country. And we also have a lot of people coming to us for other projects. So there's another documentary on the horizon that's very, very different from this. There's a lot of advertising, a lot of other projects that are popping up. And I guess it's clear that there was a real demand for a production company that could do high quality, Hollywood level work, but wasn't restricted by the political agendas that are currently guiding Hollywood and the various production companies in New York and LA. So I think I'm going to keep going with that and see what the company can produce. And I think it's going to be pretty cool. I'd like it to be a lot like I described it as sort of being an A24 or an Annapurna of the right, which is like, I don't know if you know those two, I'm sure you do, those two production companies in California that do unusual stuff, that's stylish, that's high end, that's cool, that's unique, and is, not your mainstream kind of run of the mill stuff. And I think there's a taste level that usually is, a lot of times conservatives in the US make films because, and this is good, I think this is really good that there's tons of films being made on the right, because we need that. I mean, we need every single one of them. But a lot of times it's somebody who's gotten interested in an issue, and it's like an advocacy issue, or it's a particular lifestyle issue or political issue. And then the person is like, oh, well, I think I'm going to make a movie about that. But I happen to come from a different side of it, which is that I'm not a political person who decided to make a movie. I'm a film person who happened to land in politics for a period of time. So I want to cultivate that more, where, we actually use the tools of filmmaking as they exist and actually apply them, and not just start out as, a political agenda and then go to make a movie. Because I think it's more successful, I mean, the political movies and political docs in particular, I think could stand to be more, a little edgier, a little more unique, a little more cinematic, I would say.
Yep, I'd say that too. And I think that's why the plot against the president works so well. And for everyone out there, you can watch this movie now. There's actually a website, patpmovie.com, and that has all the links. And from what I understand, Amanda, in the States, specifically, you guys are going wide. I understand there might be even limited theatrical opportunities for this film as well.
Yeah, it's actually playing in theaters this weekend. And we were adding theaters every day. We're adding more theaters. The website has the link. It says watch it now, or the theaters link, and it will always be updated. We're always going to add as many theaters as we can book. Obviously, it's a very strange year for theatrical distribution because of, most of the theaters being closed and all of this, but there actually are a lot of theaters open. And what we're doing is, unique in that we're not going to LA and New York and even DC. I mean, I think we'll probably have a premiere, like a party in DC, but it's not about getting, we're going to like Central America. Like we're going towards, the states where the people are usually ignored during film releases. So we're doing things totally differently than most films do. And also when we first released the movie, we released it on these two subscription platforms to start. One of them is called specialproject.io, and the other one is My Movies Plus. But you have to get to the movie through the links on our website. And those two platforms launched with this movie. And they're unique because I think they're going to become important for free speech, because they'll never take the movie down. They're not going to censor anything. It's really great for content creators. And I want to support that because we need our own platforms. Otherwise, we're going to be at the mercy of all of these other platforms that want to silence people. So it was important for us to launch with them. We also have the film on Vimeo on demand, which you can get to as well on our site. And we're always linking to it on our Twitter account. Our Twitter is PATP Movie as well. And, we're waiting for the other platforms. We're scheduled to be released. We should have already been out on Amazon, on, it's scheduled for iTunes, for all of these different platforms, but it's, conveniently taking longer to get on the massive ones. And I'm not going to be conspiratorial and say it's a political reason, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Considering the recent news lately in regards to Twitter and Facebook suppressing articles from the New York Post, I wouldn't be surprised though.
No, not at all. I mean, it's unbelievable what they're doing with that. It's actually, I actually just I talked to Raheem Kassam, who is in the film. I talked to him recently, and we were talking about what he points out in the film, where the media is trying to say, oh, you're not allowed to see this evidence. You're not allowed to look at this information. You have to see it through the eyes of the media. You'll hear what we tell you to hear. And that's exactly what they're doing with the Hunter Biden laptop. They're literally saying, and they're even going against their own, because the New York Post is the ones that released it. And you've got most of the media and Twitter and everybody saying, you can't look at that. I mean, it's insane. It's absolutely insane.
I agree. And I think more people who watch A Plot Against the President will see a lot of this stuff in action. It's such a fantastic documentary. And Amanda Milius, I congratulate you for putting together such a great doc in such a limited amount of time, and with the pressure on it as well. And also during an election year as well. I think it's a very relevant film for people to watch. But it's a movie that's going to last. So much. It's a movie that's going to last a while, because the issues here are going to be around for a long while to come. And I thank you very much again, and congratulations with the movie.
Oh, thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me on. I'm just so glad that it's reaching all the corners of the earth, and hopefully will be released even more widely everywhere very soon.